Okay, so it's time to see how this wine's gonna taste. That's up next. Hello everyone, this is Dwayne with Edge of Nowhere Farm, and we're coming to you here today. It is very, very early, middle of November 2019. So if you've been following along with us, we've been taking our apple harvest actually from back in June of this year and turning it into what you see here. This is our apple cider wine. So we've had a little bit of a hiatus because we actually moved. So you'll see my background has changed if you've been following along with us. We're in a different house. So we've actually had a little bit of a delay in getting this out. Had a lot of you guys asking for the next couple steps, so we wanted to go ahead and get that done today. Right now we have a completely finished 5-gallon container of apple cider wine. So again, I said we're in the middle of November. Right now we're at about 5 o'clock in the morning because we've got a lot of things to do today in order to figure out what we want to do to finish this wine. So now, because of the time, we've had this in this container now for a few months. We have re-racked it a couple times, which basically just means we've pulled it off of the remaining lees or haze that was at the bottom of the wine itself. And then you can see it's cleared up really, really nicely. So you can see very, very clear wine. The color looks a lot like apple juice, which is kind of nice. We really like that amber kind of color. I don't know, I guess apple juice or beer or cider. But ultimately what we wanted to do today is we wanted to try a little bit of this and then determine whether or not we need to back sweeten. So first let's talk about the tools that we're going to be using today. One thing we know for sure, we are going to degas this wine. So in order to do that, we've got this little degassing arm here that we have in our Amazon shop. By the way, everything that we have here you can find in our Amazon shop. I'll leave a link in the description. But we've got a degassing wand here. I've got a cordless drill to use that. We have some potassium sorbate, we'll talk about that in a minute, Camden tablets, a glass vessel to hold liquid in. We have a wine thief, we like the glass ones. We have a hydrometer for testing our specific gravity, and I do have a wine glass. So first thing we're gonna do is we're actually gonna talk a little bit about the wine and how we know it's finished. Obviously, when you're looking at this wine, you can really kind of see that it's finished. You've lost all the haziness. You know, it's been sitting in here for 4 or 5 months now. So we know that it's finished. We also did a test. We re-racked it again last night. We got a little bit of hazy wine at the very, very bottom of it. So we know that it's done. We also tested it with the hydrometer. So we do know that we're sitting at 0.990, which means that it is completely finished. So as far as taste, at this point, this wine is really ready to go in the bottle once it's degassed. However, Lori and I like our wines a little off dry. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take a little bit of wine, see if I can do my best at describing what this tastes like. I don't need much because it's 5 in the morning. I'm not much of a day drinker, but you can see the spigot works really good. And then the wine itself. So if Lori wants to slide in a little bit closer, you can see a very, very clear, nice and sparkly, beautiful, beautiful white wine. Let's see what this tastes like. Very, very good. Most of the apples we used are a little bit tart. There's a tiny bit of tart in there, very, very little. You can tell it's a finished wine. I'm not getting that real yeasty kind of flavor that you get with wine that's not finished. There's almost a little bit of sweetness in the aftertaste. The smell, it smells a lot like, you can kind of get that fruity sort of smell. At this point, I think we really probably could just go with straight bottling this wine. Lori and I have both tried this since last night, and we're thinking we want just a little bit more sweetness. We didn't add any tannin to this wine, so it doesn't have any tannins. So it's not bitter at all. It's got a very, very crisp, clean finish. However, we do like it just a smidge sweeter than this, more off dry than anything. And one note on dryness, this is definitely not super dry. Now, it's dry in the sense that there is no sugar in here, but it doesn't have that real kind of dry aftertaste, definitely no bitterness at all, and that slightly tart taste. It's very, very good. It's a fantastic tasting wine. So you could go with just this and call it done. However, Lori and I have decided that we want just a little bit of sweetness in there, so we're gonna go ahead and walk you through the steps now of how to back sweeten this, and you can make it whatever sweetness level you want. Because we're adding sugar back in, As confident as we are that there's no yeast in here, there probably still is. And Lori and I, unfortunately, because I think anybody who's made their own wine has run into this, we've definitely had wine restart fermentation in the bottle. Not a fun thing. Wouldn't suggest it. So because of that, we tend to be overly cautious at this point when we decide to back sweeten, that we're going to make sure we kill off any remaining yeast and inhibit any yeast that might still be left over. So what we're going to do is we're going to use 2 ingredients to make sure that we will not restart fermentation. The 2 ingredients we're going to be using would be potassium metabisulfite. We're going to actually use Camden tablets because it's very easy to measure. We have just over 5 gallons of wine here, so we're going to use 5 of these Camden tablets to kill off any remaining yeast. Second thing we're going to use is potassium sorbate. So potassium sorbate is really designed to inhibit any remaining yeast that survives the potassium metabisulfite. It'll stop that yeast from actually reproducing. So any sugar in there, any yeast, little yeast guys that are still left in there, this will stop them from reproducing and blowing your corks right off your wine bottle. So we're going to be using these 2 things. And then of course what we're going to do to mix these is we're going to actually go ahead and use our degassing wand and the cordless drill to get in there and actually mix these in and degas it at the same time. Let's go ahead and measure these out, get them into the bottle, and then we'll show you how to degas your wine. I've actually already gone ahead and crushed up the Camden tablets. Just take 2 spoons, you can crush those pretty easy. So I've got essentially 5 Camden tablets here, so this is ready to go in. Second thing would be the potassium sorbate. So I like these little containers for storage, makes it easy to store. One thing that we do know that we have a little over 5 gallons. There's a line right here that shows your 5-gallon mark here in this Big Mouth bubbler. That would be almost 3 teaspoons. We're gonna go ahead and add these in. That's ready to go. I'm going to remove my airlock, slide that back on. So the degasser that we have has basically a little bung on here. So all you need to do is just slide this into the container. The bung sits right there. And then I've got my drill on low, and let's go ahead and see how we're doing. Now that we've got the slow mixing done, we've got the ingredients mixed in, now what we need to do is kick this up a notch. So I've got my drill on high. Let's go ahead and see how much gas we still have left in here. I'd say there's a bit more gas in there. Let's go ahead and hit this a couple more times. Okay, so now that's the reason why you degas your wine. So if you look at that, now obviously we know that that's not yeast that's coming through there. That's actually all the gas that's left over from that fermentation process. So as clear as that looked, there was still a tremendous amount of gas in there. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna let this settle. I'm gonna hit this a couple more times just to make sure I get as much gas out of there as possible. Obviously we have all of our ingredients completely mixed in there at this point. So I'm gonna do this a couple more times, and then what we're gonna do is we're gonna cut and actually show you how we're gonna go ahead and get this sweetened, because you can't just pour straight up sugar in here to back sweeten your wine. So here we are, it's about 6 hours later, almost 7 hours later, but we're about midday. We do know that we wanna get the back sweetening done here this evening. So while we have time for this to cool, we're gonna go ahead and make the syrup for sweetening our wine. So we do actually have 2 wines that we're working with here today. The one we're not gonna be talking about is a cran apple wine. So we do have that we're gonna be back sweetening as well. So I'm using a little more of this than we typically would for the 5-gallon batch of apple wine that we're working with today. Either way, what I have here is I have 6 cups of just basic white sugar. So I'm gonna pour that into here. And then what we're gonna do to actually make the syrup is we're gonna take half as much water. So I had 3 cups of water, added it back into the sugar. And if Lori wants to slide in a little bit closer, we're gonna go ahead and get the stove turned on. And we do pretty much wanna bring this up to a boil. So a simple syrup would typically be 1 part sugar and 1 part water. But all we really need to do at this point is just get the sugar dissolved into the water. See what this looks like once it's finally done. There's a little bit of bubbling on top, clears up really, really good. There's no graininess at all in this, so we know that we've got a nice clean liquid in here. That sugar is fully dissolved, which will allow this to easily mix into the wine and not get any like sediment from the sugar itself settling to the bottom of the wine. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna leave this alone, let it cool off really, really well for the rest of this afternoon. And then when we come back to you, we're gonna sweeten that wine. Here we are back again. It's about 3:30 in the afternoon. So this has actually been off-gassing all the sulfur that's created from the potassium metabisulfite. So at this point, 10 plus hours later, we're ready to go ahead and back sweeten. So I have our syrup right here. It's cooled off quite a bit. And you can see from a color standpoint, it's pretty clear. There's a little bit of a haze on the top, which is okay. We'll get through that. We're gonna start out with about half a cup. We wanna keep our specific gravity way, way down. So we're at 0.990 now. So what we're gonna do is add about half a cup of sweetener at a time. My guess is we probably won't go above half a cup of the sugar or the syrup. So we're gonna go ahead and add that now. Now, before I do that, I do wanna point out, we did talk a little bit about what we were gonna be using as far as tools today. One of the things I mentioned was actually a wine thief. However, because we have a spigot, we won't need to use a wine thief in order to fill our vessel to test our specific gravity. So obviously, if you don't have this, you would use a wine thief. Because we don't, we're not gonna have to do that. So what I'm gonna do now, we're gonna go ahead and add the sweetener. We're gonna start with half a cup. Okay. So we got half a cup of sweetener in there. Now what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take my drill again, and I've got it on the low setting this time, because we're not trying to degas. I just wanna stir. So keep that on the lower setting. That should be good enough. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna let that settle just a little bit, and then we're gonna do the most important thing, which is give it a taste. Okay, that's really, really good. Still nice and dry, but that little tiny touch of sweetness hits the right spot. I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna have the boss try this, see what she thinks. Boss, taste test approved. So we're not gonna add any more sugar to this one, we're just fine. So now what we need to do is determine our specific gravity for our final record, because we do keep records of every single reading to make sure that we can try to duplicate it as often as possible. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna fill this vessel up. What's nice about this spigot, makes it very, very easy to go ahead and fill. Now, one of the things you'll notice as I start to fill this is we're gonna get a little bit of foam. However, if I did my job right, when it came to degassing, it should dissipate very, very quickly. And so you can see it is. So there we go, you can see the color, just a beautiful, in fact, it looks like beer. So it's a very beautiful, well, I guess it kind of looks like cider, doesn't it? But ultimately you can see just a beautiful yellow, slightly amber color. Now what we're gonna do is get our hydrometer, test our specific gravity, and see what we're gonna finish at. 0.994, which is perfect. So we came up just a couple digits there, but 0.994 is really what we're shooting for. We wanted to stay below 1 to have a good dry wine. A little bit of back sweetening there, but just where we wanted that to finish out. So that's it for back sweetening. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna let this sit. We've got a closet that we keep our wines that are finishing in. We're gonna let this sit for a week. We just wanna ensure that we don't kickstart fermentation again. So we're just gonna keep an eye, make sure we don't have any bubbling at all. This will settle any hard particles that might still be in there will go ahead and settle down to the bottom, and then we'll be able to bring this back out and bottle it. But that is the next episode. So just want to thank you for joining us today. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel. Questions or comments, leave those in the comment section down below. Instagram and Facebook, we post content there you won't see here on the YouTube channel. And our Amazon shop, I'll leave a link down in the description. That's a free, painless way to help support the channel. If you start with that link, it doesn't matter what you buy, you help to support us here. So just want to thank you for joining us today and remind you, if we can farm on the edge of nowhere, so can you. So we've got this, got brought... Do over.